Arrays and random numbers were made for each other. They're like peanut butter and jelly. The reason why is because random numbers let us generate huge numbers of things, and arrays let us remember them from one frame to another. Let's see an example. Here's a sketch we've seen before. There are 200 circles on the screen, all created by random numbers. Each one is described by a bunch of numbers, the center X and center Y, the radius, and 3 numbers that describe the color. Their motion from frame to frame is also completely random. Let's see how to write this program. In this description, I'm going to focus on the circles and not their motion, and then we can add in the motion very easily. So let's begin by creating some global arrays that will remember our circles. I'll create 3 float arrays, one to hold the center X, one to hold the center Y, and one to hold the radius for each ball. I'll also create an array of colors for the color of each ball. These 4 arrays tell me everything I need for each ball. So the first thing we want is create a setup. So here's my basic setup, and I've left out the regular stuff, the size that creates the graphics window, smooth, and that kind of thing. And I'm just focusing on the array stuff. I'm going to first create a variable called numCircles. That tells me how many balls or circles I want to make. And then later I'm going to have a loop that is going to create each of the circles. And of course, we're also eventually going to have a draw. So let's fill these things in. The first thing we want to do is create the center X for every circle. Well, in order to do that, we've got to create the array. So I'm going to allocate the array center X, and it's going to be big enough to hold all the circles. That's why I have that variable called numCircles that appears at the very top. Okay, now I have an array called center X of 200 floats, and now in my loop, which goes from 0 to 199, the first thing I'll do is I'll stick a random number into center X between 0 and width. That's the horizontal location of my circle. Well, you know what's next? I'm going to create an array for the Y's, and I'll fill in the Y's with a value from 0 to height. Next, I want to fill in the radius. So I'll create a new array of floats called radius with as many entries as the other guys, 200 of them. And in radius, I'll put in a random number between, let's say, 20 and 50. I just pick those numbers by eye. If they seem too big or too small for you, they're easy to change. Finally, I want to have a color for each ball. So I'll declare ball color to be an array of color variables. And now in the loop, for every value of I will fill in ball color with a color that uses 3 random numbers. And because I don't want any of the balls to be really, really dark, I'm going to make sure that the red, green, and blue values are all numbers between 100 and 255. When setup is done, now these 4 arrays are filled up. Every entry in the array describes a center X, Y, radius, and color. So now draw is easy. First, I write a loop, and the loop is going to go from 0 to the length of center X, which we know is going to be 200. Now I could have used center X.length, center Y.length, radius.length, ball color.length, because I know they're all the same. If one of them was shorter than the others, then I might have a problem and I'd have to think about it. But here I know they're all the same. So I'm just going to run through them all, and there's nothing to it. I'll just fill with the color of that ball, and then I'll draw an ellipse at that ball center and with that ball radius. This covers everything we saw in the running program except for the motion of the balls. Let's now look at the complete running code inside of processing. Here's the program, and I've organized it just slightly differently so it'll be easier to read in small chunks. I have my 3 floating point arrays, and as always, when I'm writing the code, I'm using these very, very short variable names so everything will fit on the screen. So I have an array of floats for center X, center Y, and the radius, and an array of colors. And if you were writing this for real, I would really recommend using the fuller names that we were using before, like spelling out center X like that. But again, here I'm trying to be very tight. So here's setup, and it does the normal things. It calls size, it calls smooth. Here's my numVols, I say it's 200, and I create my 4 arrays. Then I run through a little loop, and for every index I call makeBall. And I could have done it here in setup, but I just wanted to separate it out. So let's scroll down to makeBall. So makeBall makes ball number I. And it does just what we saw before. First, I pick a random radius between, in this case, 10 and 50. The X is between 0 and width. The Y is between 0 and height. And I chose to make the colors here in HSB mode. So first I switch to HSB. I create a random color and save that in color sub I. And then I go right back to RGB mode because that's where I like to be. So now we go to draw. And draw is really super simple. Draw first draws the background, and then I run through a loop. And in this case, I'm going through 0 to the length of the radius array. But again, they all have the same length, so it doesn't matter. I fill with the color, I draw the ellipse, and then I add a random number between -1 and 1 to the center X. And I add a random number between -1 and 1 to center Y, and that's it. So if I run this program again, we get a completely new and unpredictable set of 200 balls, and there they are. And if we said, you know what, this isn't nearly busy enough, I need more balls, then we'll scroll up here and I'll change this to 500. And now we'll have 500 circles. And there they go. And if we said, you know what, I want them to jump around even more, we'll go down here to where they're jumping around. And tell you what, rather than change all those ones, I'll just scale them up, say by 5. So that's going to make a big jump. And there they go. Oh, that's really twitchy. But it was just that easy, and we are remembering the location of every ball by using the array. Let's look at a couple of other examples of using arrays to remember random numbers. Here's the kaleidoscope program we saw before. This is almost the very same program that we just saw. There's just a couple of little differences. I'm actually only tracking one of each of these 8 balls because they're just being copied in different places. The one ball that I'm tracking is the one that starts in the middle and moves pretty much to the right and a little bit up. And then I just draw it 7 more times in the other locations. So the only difference between this program and the last one is I make sure that the ball is moving right and up, but not up too fast. And I draw it more times. Oh, and if the ball goes off screen, then I start it again in the center with a new horizontal speed, a new vertical speed, a new color, a new radius, and then I add a little bit of random stuff to the ball as it moves, so we get that little twitchy kind of a curve behind it. I can crank up the amount of twitch from one frame to the next just by multiplying it by a bigger number. That really makes things jump around a little too much. Let's go back to the old value, but make the radius change more. Now the radii of the balls are changing a lot, even though the motion is back to where it was. So the little ones get big and then they get little again, and it's just a different look. But all it took was adjusting the size of the random offset that I applied to the circle on every frame. Here's another example we saw before. These are raindrops. And again, the color, the size, the shape, the location are all generated in the beginning with random numbers and then maintained from frame to frame. In this case, when a raindrop disappears off the bottom of the screen, it reappears at the top, but in a new location with a new size and with a new color. In each of these examples, every object is created with random numbers. Then I remember the random numbers from one frame to the next using global arrays. And when an object leaves the screen and needs to start again, well, I just assign that element of the array new random numbers, and the object starts life all over again.